History, as we are told, is a story of progress. A linear march from simple to complex. From crude huts to sprawling cities. We are taught that our modern world was built upon a foundation of simple, honest labor. That the cities we inhabit rose from empty fields and untamed wilderness. But what if that foundation is a lie? What if the ground beneath our feet is not virgin soil, but a graveyard of something far more advanced? In the 19th century, hundreds of colossal structures dotted the American landscape. We are told they were forts. Simple military outposts, built to defend a young nation, and then logically cleared away to make room for progress. This is the official story. It is neat, it is tidy, and it is demonstrably false. The evidence does not show a pattern of urban expansion. It shows a pattern of systematic, coordinated, and economically nonsensical destruction. A great erasure. We will not be exploring a theory. We will be examining the record. The maps, the budgets, the photographs, and the deafening silence where detailed explanations should be. The claim is not that something is strange. The claim is that we have been deliberately misled. That the demolition of these structures was not a matter of civic improvement, but an act of historical cleansing. The proof is not hidden in some secret vault. It is in plain sight. And by the end of this investigation, you will be forced to ask, what else have they buried? Before we can understand the demolition, we must first understand the structures themselves. The official term is bastion fort or star fort. The name comes from their distinct, geometric shape, a design of interlocking, triangular bastions. The design is a work of mathematical genius, engineered to create overlapping fields of fire, leaving no blind spots for an approaching enemy. This is the textbook explanation. But look closer. The sheer scale defies the narrative of simple frontier outposts. We are talking about structures with walls of brick and stone, often dozens of feet thick and soaring 30 to 40 feet high. They are not crude stockades. They are monumental pieces of architecture. The earthworks alone, the massive sloped mounds of earth called glacis, often dwarf the walls themselves, requiring the movement of millions of cubic tons of soil. Who moved all this earth? And with what tools? We see them everywhere. From Fort J on Governor's Island in New York, to Fort Morgan in Alabama, to Fort Point in San Francisco. The same design, the same impossible scale, appears with little variation, regardless of local terrain or available materials. Why such uniformity? The placement, too, is an anomaly. While many guarded coastal harbors, a significant number were built far inland, in locations with no apparent strategic value at the time of their supposed construction. They seem to follow a logic that we are not privy to. Consider the precision. These are not rough approximations of a star. They are geometrically perfect polygons laid out over vast and often uneven landscapes. This required advanced knowledge of surveying and mathematics, executed on a scale that would challenge modern engineers with laser-guided equipment. Yet we are asked to believe they were paced out by men with chains and compasses, often in hostile territory. The anomaly is not just their size or their shape. It is their very existence. They feel out of place, out of time. They seem less like products of the civilizations that claimed them, and more like ancient relics, inherited and occupied. Like a man discovering a castle and calling it his cottage. The visual record is clear. These were not temporary forts. They were permanent, colossal structures, built to last for centuries. Why, then, were they so systematically dismantled, often just a few decades after their supposed completion? The official narrative asks us to accept a simple premise. The forts became obsolete and were removed to make way for cities. This statement falls apart when confronted with the practical reality of 19th century technology. Let's consider the act of demolition itself. This is not a matter of knocking down a wooden fence or a brick house. We are talking about deconstructing a mountain of precisely cut stone, millions of kiln-fired bricks, and densely compacted earth. Most of this demolition occurred before the widespread availability of dynamite. Think about what that means. The primary tools were manpower. Men with pickaxes, shovels, sledgehammers, and wedges. The process would have been agonizingly slow. A crew of men might spend an entire day to create a few feet of rubble in a wall that is 30 feet thick. Now, extend that over the entire perimeter of a structure that could be miles in circumference. It is a task of biblical proportions. Let's walk through the logistics. First, you must get crews of hundreds, if not thousands, of laborers to the site. You must house them and feed them. You need blacksmiths on site, constantly repairing tools that would inevitably break against the unyielding masonry. Then, there is the debris. Once you manage to break a piece of the wall free, it must be removed. This means loading tons of stone and brick, by hand, onto horse-drawn carts. A single cart can only hold so much. The procession of carts, from the demolition site to a disposal area, would have been endless. It would have clogged the streets of any burgeoning city. The cost of the labor alone would be astronomical. Where did this money come from? City budgets of the mid-19th century were notoriously small, focused on basic services like sanitation and policing. The idea that a city like Boston or New York would allocate a sum likely equivalent to its entire annual budget to demolish a fort, rather than simply building around it, is economically absurd. And for what benefit? A few extra blocks of real estate? In most cases, these cities had vast, open land available for expansion. The forts were not choking urban growth. This explanation is a convenient fiction. The sheer physical effort, the manpower required, the time it would consume, and the crippling expense it would entail makes the official story a practical impossibility. It would have been the largest and most pointless public works project of the century. And yet, it happened. Not just once, but hundreds of times, all across the nation. This wasn't progress. This was a mission. When an event of this magnitude occurs, we expect to find a comprehensive paper trail. We expect government records, engineering reports, budget appropriations, public debates, and extensive newspaper coverage. When we look for the records of the great fort demolitions, what we find is not information, but a conspicuous void. The official story is a template, repeated with minor variations from city to city. A local newspaper might print a short, sanitized paragraph. The old fort, a relic of a bygone era, is being cleared for civic improvement. Or, the War Department has deemed the structure obsolete and turned it over to the city for removal. These explanations are presented as simple facts, without controversy or question. Where are the details? Where are the passionate editorials arguing for or against the destruction of these colossal landmarks? Where are the city council meeting minutes that record the vote to spend a fortune on such a project? They are almost entirely missing. When records do exist, they are vague and unsatisfying. A single line item in a city ledger might say harbor improvement, with a figure attached that could not possibly cover the real cost. There are no detailed contracts with demolition companies. There are no surviving blueprints for the deconstruction process. The history of how these things were built is already sparse, but the history of how they were unbuilt is a near total vacuum. This is a critical failure of the official narrative. Monumental engineering projects, whether for construction or destruction, generate monumental paperwork. The absence of this paperwork is not an accident of history or poor record-keeping. Poor record-keeping is random. This is a systematic absence. It suggests that the reasons given publicly were not the real reasons. The claim of military obsolescence also fails under scrutiny. Yes, artillery technology improved. But many of these forts were still formidable defenses. Others were located in places where no military threat existed. Why demolish a perfectly good structure during peacetime? Why not repurpose it? As government buildings, as warehouses, as public parks? Some were, but the majority were simply erased. The official story fails because it is lazy. It is a surface-level explanation designed to satisfy a passing curiosity, not a serious inquiry. It asks us to believe that hundreds of towns and cities, independently and simultaneously, decided to embark on the most expensive, difficult, and illogical demolition projects in their history, for reasons that were barely documented and of questionable benefit. This is not the signature of organic progress. It is the signature of a coordinated directive. The erasure of these structures might be dismissed as a strange quirk of American history, a manifestation of a young nation's desire to build anew. This explanation becomes untenable when we expand our view. The Star Fort is not an American invention. It is a global phenomenon. We find them everywhere. In Palmanova, Italy, a perfectly preserved 9-pointed star city. In Naarden, Netherlands. In Saint Martin de Ré, France. We find their ruins in India, in Japan, in South Africa, across the Caribbean. The exact same architectural principles, the same mathematical precision, The same impossible scale, manifest across cultures, continents, and climates. The official history explains this as a diffusion of military engineering, primarily from Italy and France. But this explanation assumes a level of global coordination and construction capability in the 16th and 17th centuries that is simply not supported by the record. How did builders in remote parts of the world, with no contact, all arrive at the same complex design? How did they muster the resources to build on such a scale? The pattern is not just in their construction. It is also in their demise. All over the world, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, we see a similar push to demolish these structures. The reasons given are always the same: they are obsolete. They are in the way of traffic. They are being cleared for urban renewal. In Paris, the Thiers Wall, a massive bastion fortification, was systematically torn down. In Vienna, the city walls were removed to create the Ringstrasse. In city after city, the story repeats. These were not isolated decisions made by independent city planners. It was a synchronized global movement. It was a wave of erasure that swept across the planet, wiping the slate clean. Why? Why the sudden, universal agreement that these structures, which had stood for centuries, had to go? This global pattern transforms the anomaly from a national curiosity into a worldwide conspiracy. It suggests that the force driving this demolition was not local, but global. It implies a shared secret, a common agenda. The star forts represent a unified global network. Their architecture is a language spoken across the world. Their synchronized destruction suggests a concerted effort to silence that language, to erase the evidence of a globally connected past that predates our own accepted history. The American demolitions were not an isolated event. They were simply one theater in a much larger, undeclared war on our own history. Let us set aside the speculation and focus on the cold, hard logic of numbers. This is where the official story dissolves completely. We will perform a simple cost-benefit analysis. Let's take a single, moderately sized fort. For this exercise, we can use Castle Pinckney in Charleston Harbor. Its brickwork is estimated to contain over 10 million bricks. In the mid-19th century, the cost of a single brick was around 1 cent. The cost to manufacture the bricks alone would be $100,000, a colossal sum at the time. This does not include the cost of the mortar, the labor to lay them, the quarrying of stone foundations, or the monumental task of creating the earthworks. The construction cost would run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, equivalent to tens of millions today. Now, consider the demolition. The cost to deconstruct is often equal to or greater than the cost to construct. It requires more time and more careful labor. So, we are looking at a cost of another several $100,000, just to remove the structure. What was the benefit? The land it occupied. In the 19th century, land outside of dense urban cores was not expensive. The sale of the cleared land would, in most cases, not even come close to covering the cost of the demolition. The city would be taking a massive financial loss. Let's apply this logic nationwide. There were hundreds of these structures. If we conservatively estimate an average demolition cost of, say, $200,000 1860s per fort, and multiply that by 200 forts, we arrive at a figure of $40 million. This is a sum roughly equivalent to the entire federal budget of the United States in the 1840s. It is a number so large as to be nonsensical. This money was spent not to create, but to destroy. During this century of supposed fiscal prudence and limited government, we are asked to believe that the nation undertook one of the most expensive and least productive infrastructure projects in its history. Now consider the manpower. The population of the United States in 1850 was about 23 million. A significant portion of the able-bodied male population was engaged in agriculture. Where did the armies of specialized laborers required for these demolitions come from? The numbers simply do not align with the demographic realities of the time. The official narrative requires us to believe in a series of economic miracles, of cities making consistently irrational financial decisions that benefited no one. The numbers tell a different story. They tell us that the motive was not economic. The motive was not practical. The driving force behind this erasure had a value that could not be measured in dollars. The priority was so high that it justified bankrupting cities and diverting resources from genuinely productive projects. The goal was removal. At any cost. Given that the official explanation is a logistical, economic, and documentary failure, We are obligated to form a new hypothesis. This hypothesis must account for the scale, the global coordination, the immense cost, and the systematic erasure of records. It does not require us to believe in lost technologies or ancient astronauts. It requires us only to consider a simple, yet unsettling, premise. The builders were not who we think they were. The most logical and controlled hypothesis is that the civilization of the 18th and 19th centuries was not the builder of these forts, but their inheritor. They were discovered, not commissioned. They were relics of a previous, globally connected civilization that possessed a level of engineering and logistical skill far beyond what followed. Who this preceding civilization was, and what happened to it, is a question for a separate investigation. What matters for this analysis is how their inheritors reacted. In the early stages, the structures were useful. They were occupied, repurposed as military forts, and integrated into the new society's maps and histories. The stories were rewritten. We built this. But as the new civilization grew in confidence and began to forge its own strong, national identity, these silent, stone monuments became a problem. They were a constant, nagging reminder that the land was not empty. That the history being written was a fiction. They were proof of a forgotten predecessor, and their sheer superiority in design and construction was an uncomfortable truth. Therefore, a directive was established. Not an official, public declaration, but a quiet, top-down policy of removal. The goal was to cement the new historical narrative by removing any architecture that contradicted it. This was an act of narrative control on a global scale. It explains everything. It explains the illogical cost. The price was irrelevant because the goal was ideological, not economic. It explains the missing records. You don't document a secret, coordinated campaign of cultural erasure. It explains the synchronized timing. It happened as 19th-century nations were consolidating their power and standardizing their histories. And it explains the global pattern. The problem was the same in every country, because the inherited artifacts were everywhere. They were not demolishing forts. They were demolishing evidence. They were burying the last remnants of a world that came before, creating a blank slate upon which they could write their own story. The Great Erasure was not about making way for new buildings. It was about making way for a new history. We have examined the visual evidence of the structures. We have walked through the practical impossibility of their demolition. We have seen the failure of the official records and the undeniable global pattern. We have followed the hard logic of the numbers. The conclusion is not a comfortable one. It suggests that the history we have been taught is incomplete, at best. At worst, it is a deliberate fabrication, designed to conceal a past that is far more complex and mysterious than we are led to believe. The questions that remain are profound. Who were the original builders? What level of technology did they command? And what event caused their world to vanish, leaving only these silent stone sentinels behind? This investigation does not provide those answers. Its purpose is to demonstrate that the official narrative is not the truth. It is a story, and a flimsy one at that. The real history is still there, buried just beneath the surface. It is in the old street names of our cities, in the foundations of our oldest buildings, in the strange contours of a public park that was once the site of a leveled fortress. The evidence of the Great Erasure is all around us, if we simply learn how to see it. We are encouraged to accept history as a closed book. But the archives are never truly sealed. The facts, once uncovered, demand re-evaluation. The only path forward is to continue to question, to continue to investigate, and to refuse to accept explanations that defy logic. The past is not gone. It is merely buried, and the truth is waiting for those who are willing to dig. The archive is vast. If you wish to continue this investigation, the records are open.